Welcome. Welcome. My name is Ceta Ramkhalawansingh, and I am your moderator for this session. I live in Toronto, where I served on Toronto City Council to fill a vacancy, but I've also worked in the Toronto Public Service for about 3 decades, so I'm very familiar with all of the ups and downs of cities and their struggles. I'm also a community organizer on a range of land use and heritage matters. We have some extraordinary guests with us today. I'd like to thank Marina and Miguel at the outset, for participating. Miguel is the Attorney General for his province in Brazil and is very involved he got called away to an emergency meeting. So if we're really lucky, he'll be able to patch in before the end of the sessions. The upside is we get to have more of Marina. But in any event, we're going to try to tape Miguel's presentation and patch it in after the fact. And of course, their presentation and participation is even more meaningful because of the incredible impact of the pandemic in Brazil. And both of our guests are very involved in this activity. I'd also like to thank Richard Albert of the University of Texas for organizing this session and for inviting me and our speakers. And my thanks also go to Alan Kaspersky and his and the team's excellence in curating all of the sessions for this conference. The bios for Marina and Miguel are posted in the chat, so it's got more detail there. But what I'd like to briefly say is that Marina is currently a PhD candidate at Durham University School of Graduate Studies. And she graduated from law school in 2011, 10 years ago. And in 2015, she obtained a master's in human rights and democracy from the European Inter-University Center for Human Rights. Miguel is a constitutional law professor who holds a doctor in public laws degree, and he's also a professor of political science and constitutional law. The topic of today's session is framed around the theme of architecture of rights. And I would also characterize it as social justice and human rights. I have noted that in all of the sessions to date, the idea of rights, human rights, equality, discrimination, and social justice has come up. I've also noticed that some speakers have observed that as the diversity and concentration of the populations within urban areas that give rise to struggles and advocacy for rights. Now, since this conference is being hosted from Toronto, I would like to take the opportunity to offer a few examples of Toronto's history on the principle of justice. The founding Lieutenant Governor of Toronto, John Simcoe, introduced a legislation in 1793 to prohibit the importation of slaves. It was a compromise piece of legislation. He didn't ban slavery because many of the leaders in his government were slave owners. However, this particular action, while not freeing slaves, had the effect of Toronto becoming one of the northern terminuses of the Underground Railroad. Subsequent to that, many meetings were held in the early 19th century at Toronto City Hall, which is then located at the St. Lawrence Hall. And there were meetings about supporting the abolition of slavery. And then in the 1920s, similar campaigns were carried out to advance suffrage for women. I'm now going to fast forward to 1973, because after there were some police bath raids on the LGBTQ communities, Toronto City Council adopted a far-reaching anti-discrimination policy to include sexual orientation. And as I said, this was in 1973, so Toronto became the first order of government to implement and pass such a policy. Since then, Toronto has championed many policies on refugees, immigrant settlement, disability access, literacy, and importantly, independent oversight structures for policing. But it was not until 2010 that Toronto adopted a statement of commitment to the urban Aboriginal community. And for the first time in Toronto's history, there was a face-to-face meeting between Toronto City Council and the leadership of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. I must note that this took place under the administration of Mayor David Miller, who hosted one of the sessions yesterday. And so with that brief sketch, I'm going to ask Marina to kick off the presentation, but I must observe these 3 points in their paper. They note that the city must undergo public interventions in order to transform an equal distribution of urban space. They also note that the social functions of the city must harbor dimensions that enable minority recognition, and that these dimensions must be inclusive and emancipatory. And one third point I will make is that cities have constructed their history from the perspective of elites, and thus there's a need for government intervention in issues such as monuments and public facilities that promote figures linked to the affirmation of slavery and the process of structuring racism. So those are some key points in the abstract that I read. So Marina, without further ado, and maybe if we're lucky, Miguel will be able to join us, can I invite you to give your remarks? Thank you. Marina, over to you.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank you all for the invitation today. As Professor Ceta was saying in the beginning, Professor Miguel is right now speaking with the governor, and he can be here, but he's sending a video of his presentation. Because we worked that he was speaking first, and I was going to speak after him. It can sound that my arguments are a little bit outside the historical aspect that he was going to introduce in the beginning. So what I will do is first say that the talk that we are going to have today is about a paper that we are going to deliver in May that is called The Social Functions of Cities in Brazilian Constitution, the Right to City and the Anti-Racist Constructions of Space, Public Monuments, and Historic Minorities. Thus, one of the questions that we wanted to ask before starting explain about the right to city and public monuments and social functions was why we understand cities as architectures of rights. Why does we understand, for us who works with human rights and constitutional law, we understand that cities are architectures of rights? The relevance of cities for people's lives and for the exercise of fundamental and human rights is undoubted, a spatial element in which people congregate and in which social relations are maintained and production relations are concretely established. The spatial element of cities is linked to economical, social, historical, cultural, and even emotional factors that distinguish and identify the cities. For example, Salvador is the city that I come from, is a northeast city in Brazil. It is the capital of the state of Bahia, and outside Africa is the city where you can find the majority of Black people. I think we have 70 or 80% of Black people here in Salvador. So this is one important aspect, because this aspect speak about how our community here, our cities, is identified. And so in that way, people that are born, grow up, lived, or circulate, work, study, produce art, culture, they do it in the concrete space of the city. So the city is the space where the violations or the protections of human rights happens. So the urban space, according to the historical process that guides its development and the urbanization process, tends to be a space for denying rights. So, for example, again, my city here in Salvador, we have a lot of problems with oppression, domination, violence in regards to vulnerable people. So we can say that how the space of the city is today, it is constructed with the power, economic power, the police power, and also the violations of human rights in oppression of the vulnerable groups and minorities. Today, the majority of cities, the Brazilian historical process, for example, directed urbanization in favor of capital concentration and inequality due to private appropriation of urban space. In this regard, it is necessary for us to rethink the aim and direction of urbanization. What I wanted to say is, because of our history, our backgrounds comes from exploration, violence, concentration of power, and inequality. All of these characteristics are seen in the public space in the city, which enable people or a small kind or elite, or the people who are part of the economic power or the political power, to continue to violate minorities and vulnerable groups. One of the questions that, when we were writing this paper that me and Miguel had, was about the monuments and the right to city, and in regards to monuments, when these monuments are from those people who violated or oppressed people. For example, here in Brazil, we have a lot of monuments of slave owners, of people who destroyed indigenous communities, or people who violated women's rights. One example of this is here in Brazil, it is the Pelourinho. The Pelourinho refers to a stone column located in the center of a public square in Salvador, where slaves were exposed and punished. And through time, the Pelourinho suffered a transformation. What happens to Pelourinho? Pelourinho right now is a district of Salvador where most of the people who live there are Afro-descendant, and they transformed this space, this space that were for their ancestral place of violations, of hurt, of a lot of death. They transformed this space to show the Afro culture. They created new social projects to empower their people. So when we speak about the social functions of cities in the Brazilian Constitution, we speak about the principle of human dignity. So the base for the social functions of cities in Brazil, the right of cities in Brazil, is the protection and the application of the principle of human dignity. Thus, the civil space or the city space that we have to rethink them in a way that we transform this place in a place of not of oppression, of violence, of inequality, of privatization, but a place of solidarity, a place of common good for everybody, of social justice. And the only way we can do that is when we have, when we use history in our favor. Thus, another example that we were speaking, me and Miguel, and we understand that this is how the interpretation, if you interpret the Brazilian constitution as a human right, laws and defender, we understand that these monuments, they shouldn't be destroyed, or they shouldn't be left out or put in another place. We believe that these monuments should stay where they are, but some people, or the people who suffer, or from the community of these minority groups that suffer in history because of these people, they should transform these monuments. For example, like they did with the Pelourinho, or if we are speaking with the monument per se, right by the side of the monument, write a story about this person, telling the truth that this person was, for example, a slaver owner, and this person caused a lot of suffer and a lot of violations against a minority of group of people. So we understand that when we have these two contrast, or these two forms together, the people can look at these monuments and understand their history and understand what happened. Because if you take away the monument, it will be forgotten. A lot of things will be forgotten. And as history taught us, we have to still learn and understand how history was, so we can move to a better place, move to social justice, move to a better community, and fight for human rights. And to end my, because I know I have 5 minutes, to end my my dissertation, or to end my speech, I would like to say that what is happening in Brazil right now is because a lot of things that happened during the dictatorship was forgotten. Why it was forgotten? Because a lot of things were put under the rug. And what happens is that people didn't understand or didn't have the knowledge of what these people really did. And because of that, in Brazil today, we see a lot of people asking for military dictatorship again, and asking for a lot of things that violates the right to city, and violates human rights, and violates the principle of human dignity. So I think that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Marina, have you been successful in removing any statues, or is the preference one of translating that history? Translating that history so it's commemorative and educative.
We not in regards to monuments, public monuments, the only one that I know that comes to my mind is the Pelourinho, because in the middle of the Pelourinho, they had a stack that the slaves were attached, and they would be whipped by the slave owners. What happened is this stack was removed, but the place is still called Pelourinho. So what happens is they know what Pelourinho is, they know what Pelourinho meant to their ancestral, they know what Pelourinho still means to a lot of people, but what they did is that they transform, they make the transformation of this place to be a place of empowerment, of Afro-descendant culture, of Afro-descendant music, of Afro-descendant art. So if you go to Pelourinho today, you are going to see a place that vibrates their history, you know, that vibrates their religion, the candomblé, that vibrates how the history of these people who were brought here by violence, but they find a way to transform this place into a place that they can acknowledge it. It was a place of suffering, but today it is a place of happiness, of diverse culture, of a different religion, of music, of art, of all of the things that it means to be Afro-descendant in Brazil.
Are you, is this widespread throughout the country, or is it mainly concentrated in cities, or some cities more than others? Are there some particular areas?
In Brazil, I think it is, even into today, it is not widespread. It is not something that you find being discussed in Brazil at all, actually. Normally, they discuss, for example, what happened in the UK with this one of the monuments that they threw in the water, or in the US, and the flags and everything. But here in Brazil, we don't discuss that. It's not something that we discuss a lot. Pelourinho, I think it is one of the places that you can find that. And as well, in Olinda, they also have a square that had the same history that the Pelourinho had, and was changed as well. But speaking about monuments, we don't have that in this regard. We don't have that change. We do have, for example, the change of names of schools who were from dictators during the Brazilian dictatorship. At least here in my city, we got some schools, public schools, to change the name of the city, because the name of the person was the name of a dictator who did terrible things to people. So I can think of more about school changing names than monuments, public monuments being or put out, or trying to write something by the side to explain who this person really was.
Let's talk a little bit about something else other than monuments. And that is, in your paper, you talk about the importance of inclusion and making room for people who are disadvantaged in cities. I was wondering, given that Miguel is away dealing with COVID issues, and it is quite rampant in your country, can you talk a little bit about the equity issues involved in responding to the pandemic in cities, or even within the country as a whole?
Yeah. in regards to COVID and all of these things, the people who suffer the most with COVID are vulnerable communities. Our communities, indigenous communities, and our communities, there are quilombola communities. The quilombola means enslaved, ex-enslaved people who create a community when they were running away from the slave owners. And also in the favelas. The favelas, you have a lot of problems over there because of inequality and the lack of basic human rights. Basic human rights, I say sanitation, access to water, access to food, access to all of these kind of things that would help at least people not to get COVID. What happens is that in Brazil right now, we have a government that he only govern for the rich people. So the poor people here, or the most vulnerable people here, they feel left out. What happens is inside of a city, it is worse because, for example, if you get a bus, it is full of people inside. It looks like a sardine can. It is like that. It's exactly like that. So it is so much violations of the constitutions of human rights because we are not creating social programs for these vulnerable people to stay at home. So they have to go out to buy food or to work to have money. And what happens is that when these people go out, the virus spread. And right now, for example, our system, our health system that is universal, it is almost full. There are some places in Brazil that we don't have places in the UCI anymore. So yesterday, almost 4,000 people, a little bit more than 4,000 people died because of lack of public places inside of the hospital, and as well because they don't have access to sanitations, they don't have access to food, they don't have access to all these human basic rights right now. So what is happening right now in Brazil, it's a carnificine, you know. And for example, right now, Miguel is working on a petition in the Supreme Court, so to allow our government, our state government, to buy vaccines, because the federal government are just not buying enough. So the problem with the cities is that the city is not made for this kind of pandemic, for this kind of crisis that we are facing right now. Because if you go to the favelas, they live everybody lives so close to each other. Sometimes there are in one house 10 people living there. So it is a carnificine what is happening right now in Brazil, because the government is not helping the people and not protecting their human rights, and the people have to go out to try to work or something, or they just don't have food or anything. So it's just a hard decision for them to make. If they stay at home, they don't have food. If they go out, they can get the virus. So that's the decision that the people has here in the city.
Marina, I think we've run out of time, but the picture that you have painted is one which we can relate to in Canada, because there are similar patterns, not quite as extreme as your situation, but we can see the patterns. Thank you so much for being part of discussion and for filling in for Miguel. He owes you.
Yeah.
So-
No, I understand he has something that is really important to our country. And thank you for the invitation. I'm sorry for all the wrong English words that sometimes comes out, but
You have nothing to be sorry for. We understood
I
everything.
hope you understood what was the idea of the paper that we are writing on.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Thank you. And have a good day.